This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, Bruchim Haba, and welcome everyone. Tonight we're going to discuss a very important topic. A topic that's on everyone's mind. Already for 49 days, some people think it's countdown to the food on Shavuos. We've been preparing for this. We've been anticipating, yearning for the ma'achalim of Shavuos. And what we're going to learn tonight is what is the correct menu for Shavuos and how to eat it. Okay, it's a very important topic. This is one of the Yisoidei HaYisoidei. It's one of the fundamentals of Judaism, how to eat on Shavuos. And what we're going to learn tonight may surprise you as to the proper anhagos of Leil Shavuos. Now we're all familiar with the time-honored tradition of eating ma'achalei chalav, dairy products, on Shavuos. It is reported that the earliest source of eating ma'achalei chalav on Shavuos is the Kolbai. We don't know exactly who wrote the Kolbai, although we do know it was written by one of the Rishonim. And the Kolbai brings down the custom, Nagu lechol devash v'chalav b'chag Shavuos. The minhag is to eat honey and milk, so that's a new one. Honey. It's a minhag to eat honey and milk on Shavuos because the Torah is compared to honey and milk, like the pasuk says, devash v'chalav tachas l'shaynech. Honey and milk are under its tongue. The Torah is considered delectable, delicious, and the Torah is considered so delicious. The two most delicious tastes are milk and honey, and the combination of the two produces an unparalleled taste. And this is a remez, this is a reason, says the Kolbai, for the minhag of eating dairy on Shavuos. It's also reported in a very interesting sefer, the name of the sefer, Sefer Minhagim of the Marami Rottenberg, that the Maram personally ate dairy on Shavuos because of this pasuk of Devash v'chalav tachas l'shaynech. The Torah is compared to milk and honey. Okay, very interesting. Comes the Rishon Rabbeinu Avigdor Hatzarfasi. Also, I believe this is the first time we're featuring Rabbeinu Avigdor Hatzarfasi. And he says that the custom of eating dairy on Shavuos is actually rooted in the Chumash itself. Can you imagine such a thing? So, if you happen to be finding yourself eating cheesecake on Shavuos, you should know what you're doing is a very holy practice. It has basis in the Psukim of the Chumash. Where is there a basis? Well, if you look at number 4 in Parshas Pinchas, we know the Torah refers to Shavuos as Yom HaBikurim. It says, "Behakrivchem mincha chadasha laHashem b'shavuos seichem." Says Rabbeinu Avigdor, the words chadasha laHashem b'shavuos seichem, Rashi Teivos, chalav, milk. So here you have it. It's a pasuk in Chumash already. The minhag of eating dairy is merumaz in the pasuk. But here's the problem. Here is the big question that we need to think about this evening. And that is, how in the world are you supposed to eat milk, dairy on Shavuos? There's a pasuk in the Chumash that says, V'samachta b'chagecha. You got to rejoice on the Yom Tov. So you say, why does that stop me from eating milk? Well, the Rambam says, very importantly, what does it mean, V'samachta b'chagecha? How do you rejoice on the Yom Tov? The Rambam says, the Simcha that the Torah is talking about refers to the Karban Shlamim, the Shalmei Chagiga, that B'zman Shebeis HaMikdash HaYakayim, when the temple stood, every Jew had to go to Yerushalayim and bring a Karban so that he would have meat to eat. But, says the Rambam, nevertheless, even though we don't bring this Karban today, the mitzvah of Simcha includes other forms of Simcha. For example, you need to be happy, you need to make your family happy, you need to make your wife happy, you need to make your children happy. Says the Rambam, in Hilchos Yom Tov, Parak Vav, Halacha Yerches, Ketzad, your children, you need to give them nuts and candies. It's a mitzvah d'oraisa, not a mitzvah d'rabbanan. It's a mitzvah d'oraisa to buy your kids treats for Yom Tov. You have to wear tefillin, you have to wear tzitzis, you have to say Kriya Shema twice a day, and you need to buy your kids treats for Yom Tov. It's a mitzvah in the Torah. Where? V'samachta b'chagech. And then the Rambam continues. What about your wife? Says the Rambam, "V'hanoshim koina lahem begodim v'tachshit noem." You have to buy your wife beautiful clothing, kafim amoinai, in accordance with your financial status. And what about men? Well, if you would like to consider yourself a man, then, says the Rambam, V'ha'anoshim oichlin basar. Men eat not lettuce, not strawberries, not sweet potatoes, not macaroni and cheese, says the Rambam. V'ha'anoshim oichlin basar. Men eat meat. You hear that? Men eat meat. Meat. V'shoysin yayin. Men drink wine. Not soda, not Snapple, not Hawaiian Punch. Men drink wine. Why? Says the Rambam, she'ein simcha ella b'basar v'ein simcha ella b'yayin. If you would like to right, there are three categories of people. There are children, women, men. So depending on what category you would like to fit into, you see new suit for a lady. You want to consider yourself a man? You could get yourself a new suit. That's fine. But you also have to eat meat, and you also have to drink wine. Is this a mitzvah? Is this a minhag? It's not a minhag. Is it a mitzvah d'Rabbanan? No. It's a mitzvah d'Oraisa. You wear tefillin, you keep Shabbos, according to the Rambam, then on Yom Tov you eat meat and you drink wine. Only if you want to be an Orthodox Jew. Okay, that's the opinion of the Rambam. Where did the Rambam get this from? Where did the Rambam get, now what about his chicken meat? We're not discussing that tonight. Maybe Friday. Where did the Rambam get this from? Well, it's a Gemara in Psachim on Daf Kuf Tes, and Parak Arvei Psachim, look at number 7. Tanya, Rabbi Yehuda ben Meseira Omer, Bizman Shabbos Hamikdash Kayim, when the temple stood, Ein Simcha Ella Bebasar. The only happiness is with the meat of the carbon Shalmei Chagiga. Shenemar, V'zavachta Shlamim V'yachalta Sham, V'samachta L'fnei Hashem Lekecha. Says the Gemara, Biachshav Shein Beis Hamikdash Kayam, but nowadays there's no temple, right? You knew that? There's no Beis Hamikdash today. Everybody know that? Nowadays there's no Beis Hamikdash. How are you happy? Ein Simcha Ella B'yayin. Shenemar V'yayin Yisamach Levav Enosh. Wait a second. The Rambam says if you want to be happy on Yom Tov, what do you have to do? You have to eat meat, you have to drink wine. The Rambam says very clearly, Ein Simcha Ella B'basar, Ein Simcha Ella B'yayin. Hey Rambam, where'd you get it from? The Gemara doesn't say that. The Gemara says when the Beis Hamikdash stood, Ein Simcha Ella B'basar. Now that there's no Beis Hamikdash, Ein Simcha Ella B'yayin. The Gemara does not say one word about eating meat on Yom Tov. Where did Maimonides get it from? Comes along Maran Bet Yosef, comes along the Beis Yosef, and Beis Yosef quotes the Gemara, and he quotes the Rambam, and he says, I don't get where the man got that you have to eat meat on Yom Tov. Says the Beis Yosef in the last line, V'yesh l'tmaya ala Rambam, lama hitzrach sheyochlu basar v'yishtu yayin. Why does the Rambam say you need to eat meat and drink wine? The Braisa Katani, the Braisa that we just learned in Psachim Koftes, says Bizman Hazeh nowadays Ein Simcha Ella B'yayin. Umashma B'yayin Sagi B'loi Basar. The Gemara is mashma, you could drink wine, you don't have to eat meat. So who told the Rambam you should eat meat on Yom Tov? Where'd he get it from? And in fact, if you look in the Shulchan Aruch, when the Beis Yosef, by the way, you know what Shulchan Aruch is? Shulchan Aruch is only a kitzur of the Beis Yosef. Because, Rabbi Yosef Karo wanted every Jew to know halacha, and he figured it would be very hard to chazer all of the Beis Yosef on the Aled Chalkei Shulchan Aruch every month. So he made a kitzur. The kitzur is called Shulchan Aruch. He broke it up into 30 parts. This way you could learn something like 70 simanim every day and finish the whole Shulchan Aruch in only a month. So all these huge books that we have is like, Chafetz Chaim Yomi. Well, it used to be like Shulchan Aruch Yomi. You would learn like a chilik of Mishnah Berurah every day. But the printers conveniently took out the breakup of the days, and now people think you're supposed to learn it over the course of 30 years. Really, it's only once every 30 days. The Shulchan Aruch writes, what do you do on Yom Tov? Look at number 9. Shulchan Aruch Siman Tav Kuf Chav Tes. On the fourth line, chayiv livtzai al shtei kikaros. You need to eat 2 loaves of bread. V'lekvaya kol suda al hayayin. And each meal you need to drink wine. Wait a second. What happened to basar? The answer is you don't have to eat basar according to the Shulchan Aruch. The position of Maran Bet Yosef, position of the Mechaber, is there is no mitzvah, there's no obligation, there's no mitzvah, there is no inyan, it's not a minhag, it's not even better. Meat is unnecessary on Yom Tif according to the Beis Yosef. The Rambam says it's a mitzvah d'oraisa. The Rambam says it's like wearing tefillin, it's like keeping Shabbos. The Beis Yosef doesn't say a word about it. You know why? Because the Gemara doesn't say a word about it. Okay? So now we're getting a little bit clear. So if I were to ask you, let's say on Shavuos, you would want to eat one meal. Let's say you would want to have eggplant parmesan for one meal. Would you be allowed to do that on Yom Tov? Would be machlokes between the Shulchan Aruch and the Rambam. The Shulchan Aruch would say, yeah, you could have pizza for all meals of Yom Tov. There's no inyan of eating meat on Yom Tov. According to the Rambam, you're violating a mitzvah d'oraisa if you have even one dairy meal on Yom Tov. But so far, we have the Rambam, we have the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch doesn't mention a word about meat. So all of you who follow Maran Bet Yosef, you're safe, even if you don't have meat. What is the explanation for the Beis Yosef? Why would the Beis Yosef and the Shulchan Aruch feel that you don't have to eat meat nowadays? After all, when the Beis Hamikdash stood, you needed to eat meat midoraisa. Why would that mitzvah d'oraisa be exempted nowadays? Why would you not have to eat meat nowadays? What would the difference be between the meat of a carbon shlamim when the Beis Hamikdash stood and meat today? Meat is meat. If you had to eat meat when the temple stood, why would you not have to eat meat today? It's not like, so the Shalos Teshuvas Binyan Shloimeh asks, why do you have to eat meat on Yom Tov? For Simcha. So if you had to eat meat for Simcha when the Beis Hamikdash stood, why would you not have to eat meat for Simcha nowadays? So he says, maybe I'll tell you the reason is, because, after the temple was destroyed, the whole world plummeted. And pleasure is not the way it once was. And maybe you'll say when the temple was destroyed, meat doesn't taste good anymore. It used to be meat was juicy, it was full of minerals, iron, it was rich in red blood cells, and nowadays it tastes like a piece of cardboard. Nowadays, meat is so bad that people could go to a fish store and convince themselves, that tuna fish, it was like a steak. See, you ever hear such a bizayon to meat? That people could go eat fish and say, the tuna steak was as good as a piece of steak. Why is that? That's just because meat nowadays is so schwach that people could convince themselves that a piece of tuna fish tastes like steak. So maybe you'll make the case that nowadays that there's no Beis Hamikdash, meat doesn't taste good anymore. Well, says the Binyan Shloimeh, then why would there be a mitzvah to drink wine on Yom Tov? Maybe wine also doesn't taste good anymore. Says the Binyan Shloimeh, that's not the reason. You know why there used to be a reason to eat meat, and now you're exempt from eating meat according to the opinion of the Beis Yosef? Because meat was eaten in the form of a carbon, a sacrifice. When you eat the meat of a carbon, you're benefiting 2 aspects of yourself. There's a physical pleasure. Your body is getting nourishment from the meat. And there's a spiritual pleasure. You're eating kachim. It's a dvar mitzvah. You're eating it lefnei Hashem. You're ingesting an item that has kedusha. You're eating a carbon. So it's good for your guf. It's good for your neshama. But nowadays when you eat meat, it's only good for your body. But your neshama gets nothing from it because it's not kachim. And therefore maybe, says the Binyan Shloimeh, there's no more mitzvah to eat meat. But wine, says the Binyan Shloimeh, not only is it good for your body, it's also good for your soul. Why is that? Because when you drink wine, different secrets of Torah start pouring forth from your soul into your mind. Nichnas yayin, yatsa, soid. So therefore, wine continues to benefit your soul. So therefore, says the Binyan Shloimeh, now I understand the opinion of the Beis Yosef. When the Beis Hamikdash stood, and eating basar was good, not only for your body, but for your soul also. There's a mitzvah to eat meat. But nowadays, where there's no achilas kachim, so you don't have to eat meat anymore, but you do have to drink wine, because wine is good for your body, wine is good for your soul. This is the opinion of Maran Bet Yosef, that nowadays on Yom Tif, you don't have to eat meat. You could come home, you could have a big salad with lettuce and cabbage and strawberries and spinach and all kinds of things that there are people in this world, I think, that like. And you could eat that. You can eat that, according to Beis Yosef. There's no inyan of eating meat. You don't even have to eat tuna steaks. You don't have to. All you need to do, according to Beis Yosef, is you have to drink wine. So you could have eggplant parmesan, you could drink wine, and you fulfilled all your mitzvahs. But that's not the opinion of the Rambam. The Rambam says, Ein simcha ela b'basar, ein simcha ela b'yayin. Comes the Yam Shel Shlomo, and the Yam Shel Shlomo would like to explain the opinion of the Rambam. Again, the Rambam said, Bizman hazeh, you must eat meat on Yom Tif midoraisa. But the Gemara doesn't say that. The Gemara says you only had to eat meat when the Beis HaMikdash stood. And nowadays, Ein simcha ela b'yayin. Says the Yam Shel Shlomo, this was Karo's question, obviously referring to Beis Yosef. He calls him Mahari Karo. And here's my answer. The Gemara does not mean that when the Beis HaMikdash stood, there's a mitzvah to eat meat. And nowadays, there's only a mitzvah to drink wine. This is what the Gemara means. When the Beis HaMikdash stood, all you had to do to be Mekayim, the mitzvah d'oraisa, is eat meat. And you could drink whatever you want. You could drink peach diet Snapple. You could drink Hawaiian Punch. You could drink water. You could drink seltzer, Sprite with a red label. Whatever you want, you could drink. Right? But that's when the Beis HaMikdash stood and you're eating the meat in the presence of God. But now that we don't have a Beis HaMikdash anymore, now your eating of meat is lacking. Says the Gemara, nowadays, Ein simcha ela b'yayin, with your meat. That's what the Gemara means. Says the Yam Shel Shlomo, Rabbi Yosef Karo did not understand the Gemara the correct way. The Gemara doesn't mean, it used to be only meat, now only wine. What the Gemara means, it used to be only meat. When you're eating meat in the Beis HaMikdash, you don't need wine to elevate the achila of the meat. But nowadays, you don't have a Beis HaMikdash, then you need wine to elevate the achila of the meat. And this is the pshat in the Rambam. Why? Bizman hazeh, ein simcha ela b'basar, ve'ein simcha ela b'yayin. So right now, if I were to ask you, are you allowed to have a milchik meal on a Yom Tif? What would you say? It's machlokes between the Rambam and the Yam Shel Shlomo on one side, and the Beis Yosef, Shulchan Aruch, and the Binyan Shlomo on the other side. According to the Shulchan Aruch, those who follow strictly Shulchan Aruch, you can eat meat, you can eat milk the whole Yom Tif. You don't even have to look at meat the whole Yom Tif. According to the Rambam and according to the Yam Shel Shlomo, you must eat meat midoraisa by each meal. Yeah? There's a third opinion. And that is the opinion of the Magen Avram. Take a look in number 12. If I could ask everyone to please, gentlemen. The Magen Avram in number 12, Magen Avram says in Siman Tav Kuf Chav Tes, Magen Avram says, mitzvah lechol basar. The Magen Avram says it's a mitzvah to eat meat. And the Magen Avram says, there are 4 days a year when there's the greatest chiyuv to eat a big suda. And based on Tosfos and Avodah Zarah, those 4 days are the first day of Pesach, first day of Shavuos, Rosh Hashanah, and the last day of Sukkot. These are the 4 most important days of Achila during the year. And Tosfos and Avodah Zarah says the reason for Shavuos is because on Shavuos all Tanoim agree, Ba'inon nami lachem. Okay. So again, the Magen Avram says, mitzvah lechol basar. The problem is, in number 14, the Magen Avram says, this is in Hilchos Purim, ein chiyuv lechol basar rak bizman shebeis hamikdash kayam. The only obligation to eat meat is when the temple stood. So we have a full-fledged, bona fide stira in the Magen Avram. Magen Avram says in Hilchos Yom Tif there's a mitzvah to eat meat. Magen Avram says in Hilchos Purim that there's no mitzvah to eat meat on Yom Tif, only when the Beis HaMikdash stood. So what's pshat in the Magen Avram? It's a stira. It must be the Magen Avram holds the same as the opinion of the Shulchan Aruch Harav. Shulchan Aruch Harav says, very interesting. Shulchan Aruch Harav says in Archaim Sim Tov Kuf Chavtes, Shulchan Aruch Harav says, how are you happy on Yom Tif? Children, you give them treats. Nashim, you give them clothing. Men, when the Beis HaMikdash stood, they would eat the basar of a shlamim. And now that there's no Beis HaMikdash, you're not yotze your chiyuv only with yayin. Avo basar ein chayva lechol achshav. There's no obligation to eat meat. Umikamakai mitzvah yesh b'achilas basar. Even though it's not obligatory to eat meat, it is a positive commandment in the Torah to eat meat. Which means like this. You're not obligated to eat meat. If you don't eat meat, you're not violating. Gentlemen, I'm asking you a second time, please. There's no obligation to eat meat, but according to the Magen Avram, there is a mitzvah to eat. According to the Shulchan Aruch, there's a mitzvah to eat meat. Okay? And in fact, if you look at number 16, the Darkei Tshuva is written by Reb Tzvi Harish Shapira, the father of the Minchas Elazar. He wrote a major commentary on Yoreh De'ah, and he says, he asked the stira on the Magen Avram, where the Magen Avram, in Siman Tav Kuf Chavtes, he says there's a mitzvah to eat meat, and in Siman Tafrei Tzadik Vav, he says there's no chiyuv to eat meat, to which the Darkei Tshuva says, it's not a stira. Look at the last line, number 16. V'divrei HaMagen Avram ein soisrin zeh. There's no contradiction. D'loi have a mitzvah chiyuvis. It's not obligatory. Rak mitzvah lechatchila. It's only a mitzvah. In other words, we're not obligating you to do it, but if you do it, you fulfill a mitzvah in the Torah. Comes the Chafetz Chaim. So now we've seen three opinions. Shulchan Aruch doesn't say a word about meat. No Indian of eating meat at all, according to Beis. According to the Rambam seems to say you're obligated to eat meat. Ein simcha ela b'basar, ein simcha ela b'yayin. And the Magen Avram says it's a mitzvah and there's no chiyuv. He seems to say it's not an obligation, but it's a mitzvah d'oraisa. Who do we paskin like? Of these three opinions, who do we paskin like? Well, the Chafetz Chaim in the Biur Halacha paskins not like the Shulchan Aruch and not like the Rambam, the way we understood him at first, but like the Magen Avram. And the Shulchan Aruch says, the Biur Halacha says, look at number 17, says the Chafetz Chaim, men, when the Beis HaMikdash stood, they needed to eat meat of a shlamim, but nowadays that the Beis HaMikdash is not standing, ein yotzin yedei chayva simcha ela b'yayin. The only way to fulfill your obligation of simcha is by drinking wine. Aval basar ein chayva lechol achshav. But meat, there's no obligation. Mitzvah yesh b'achilas basar. But there's a mitzvah. So we have three opinions. Shulchan Aruch says, meat, not on the menu. The Rambam says, it better be on the menu. Chafetz Chaim says, wine for sure has to be on the menu. If you don't drink wine by a Sudas Yom Tif, you're mavatel a chiyuv d'oraisa. You hear this? Everybody has to know that. You wear tefillin, you sit in a sukkah, talis, you say Kriya Shema, you shake a lulav and esrig, you need to drink wine at your Yom Tif. Is grape juice wine? It's machlokes. Rav Moshe says no. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says yes. But that's for a different time. Okay, we're not discussing now whether grape juice is wine. How much you have to drink, also a matter of discussion. Some places can say you have to drink a revius. Some places can say even a davar muad is good enough. Okay, but that's not what the shiur is about. Wine, obligation. Meat, according to the Chafetz Chaim, it's a mitzvah. So if I were to ask you the following question right now, would it be okay to have a milchik meal on Yom Tif? Well, those who follow the Shulchan Aruch, yeah. Ashkenazim, would it be okay to have a milchik meal on Yom Tif? No. No. What do you mean? It's not an obligation, it's just a mitzvah. What do you mean it's just a mitzvah? So is tzitzis just a mitzvah? You wear tzitzis every day. Of course. Why? Because if you have an opportunity to fulfill a mitzvah d'oraisa, you can't just shirk it. You can't just say, well, I'm not really in the mood. You know, the Gemara says that even though there's no legislated punishment for not fulfilling a mitzvah, but if you have the opportunity to fulfill a mitzvah and you don't, at certain times of charoy naf, person's held liable. It would not be recommended to have a milchik meal according to the Chafetz Chaim. Right now, at this point in the Shiur. Let's talk about another thing. Let's talk about another Indian. The mitzvah of Simcha on Yom Tif in general. Is it a mitzvah d'Rabbanan or is it a mitzvah d'Oraisa? Nowadays, is it a mitzvah d'Rabbanan? Well, we already saw the Rambam says it's a mitzvah d'Oraisa. Not everybody agrees with the Rambam. Tosfos in Masechta Moed Katan, Tosfos is talking about, the Gemara in Moed Katan says, if lo yaleinu, a person is an avel, the person is an avel, and the avelus is headed into the first day of Yom Tif. Now, the Gemara says you cannot keep avelus on the first day of Yom Tif, because the mitzvah d'oraisa of Simcha on Yom Tif pushes off the mitzvah d'oraisa of avelus. Comes Tosfos and he says, avelus is not a d'oraisa, avelus is a d'Rabbanan. According to Tosfos, avelus on the first day of Yom Rishon d'Avelus is a d'Rabbanan. So says Tosfos, well, Asiyas Malacha as an Avel is only d'Rabbanan. But then Tosfos says, Simcha on Yom Tif is also d'Rabbanan. The opinion of Tosfos in Moed Katan is the mitzvah of Simchas Yom Tif is only a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. However, we already learned that the opinion of the Rambam is, the Rambam says very clearly, when the Beis HaMikdash stood, then they ate a carbon shlamim, and now that the Beis HaMikdash is not standing anymore, so we are Mekayim Simcha, we fulfill Simcha with Basar Yayin. The Rambam clearly says, B'zman hazeh, Simcha is d'Oraisa. Says the Shagas Aryeh, okay, you ready? We're about to learn a Shagas Aryeh. Fasten your seatbelts. If anybody asks you what we learned tonight, you tell them we learned the Shagas Aryeh, they're going to think, woo, you're big stuff, okay? You learned the Shagas Aryeh. Says the Shagas Aryeh, I side with the Rambam. I hold that Simcha B'zman hazeh is d'Oraisa. You know what the proof is? The proof is from the opinion of the Rif. The Rif holds that the first day of Avelos is a Chiyav d'Oraisa. So if Avelos, lo yaleinu, is d'Oraisa on the first day, that means the Gemara is saying, if someone is an Avel on the first day of Yom Tif, they're not noiheg Avelos, because the mitzvah of Simcha of Yom Tif pushes off the Avelos. But according to the opinion of the Rif, that Avelos is d'Oraisa, how could Simcha push off Avelos? If Simcha is only d'Rabbanan, how could Simcha, which is d'Rabbanan, push off Avelos, which is d'Oraisa? It must be, says the Shagas Aryeh, Simcha on Yom Tif is also a d'Oraisa. Says the Shagas Aryeh, but nowadays, B'zman hazeh, we don't have carbon shlamim anymore. Listen carefully to what the Shagas Aryeh says. He says, the mitzvah of Simcha on Yom Tif is not a specific mitzvah. It's not like, wear tefillin, sit in the sukkah, take the dalan minim. It's a mitzvah of be happy. So when the Beis HaMikdash stood, the way to be happy was to bring a carbon shlamim, because we find the Torah uses an expression of simcha by bringing a carbon shlamim. But nowadays that we don't have a carbon shlamim, then that mitzvah d'Oraisa would be transformed into being happy in however we could be happy. So how could we be happy today? So the Rambam says that today we're happy. Ein simcha ela b'basar. The only way to be happy is with meat. Ein simcha ela b'yayin. The only way to be happy is with wine. But if the mitzvah was, you have to eat a carbon shlamim, then the mitzvah b'zman hazeh would only be midrabanan, because we don't have a carbon shlamim. But says the Shagas Aryeh, the mitzvah is not eat a carbon shlamim. The mitzvah is be happy. So now it's open to whatever the available means of happiness are at any particular time. And b'zman hazeh, the way to be happy is to eat meat and to drink wine. comes the Darkei Tshuva, and he says that to me it seems from the Shagas Aryeh that the mitzvah of Simcha on Yom Tif is now subjective to your personal preference. If the mitzvah would be eat a shlamim, so then I got to eat a shlamim. But the Shagas Aryeh says the mitzvah is just to be happy. And whatever means that are available, B'zman hazeh to be happy, you should partake of them. But says the Darkei Tshuva, to me it seems that this now becomes a mitzvah that is open to your personal preference. And therefore he suggests that if you like milk better than meat, then you don't have to eat meat. You could be Mekayim Simchas Yom Tif with milk, with chalav. And the Nitei Gavriel, if you look at number 21, Rav Gavriel Tziner, he says also, if you don't like wine, if wine gives you a headache, you're disgusted by wine, since the mitzvah of Simcha is make yourself happy with whatever means are available to you, so now it's open to your personal preference. If you don't like wine, you don't have to drink wine. I respectfully disagree with this interpretation of Shagas Aryeh. I don't think this is what the Shagas Aryeh is saying. Haga ba'atzmacha. Let's say a guy says, I'm happy because of when I read the newspaper. So now this person is Mekayim Simchas Yom Tif by reading the newspaper. Would anybody say that? He doesn't like meat. He doesn't like wine. He likes to read the newspaper. So now his Simchas Yom Tif is reading the newspaper. I have a question. Let's say Bizman Shebeis HaMikdash Hayakayam, a guy says, I personally don't enjoy bringing a carbon shlamim. I get a bigger kick out of sitting in my hammock. Could he exempt himself from a carbon shlamim because that's not his personal preference of being happy? Of course not. The Shagas Aryeh does not mean that this is a mitzvah that's open and being given to your preferences. The Shagas Aryeh means the following. The mitzvah is not to eat a carbon shlamim, it's to be happy. And however the Torah recognizes as a legitimate source of happiness, you need to take advantage of that legitimate source. So when the Beis HaMikdash stood, that legitimate source was bringing a carbon shlamim. Now that we don't have a Beis HaMikdash, there are only two legitimate sources of Torah-recognized sources of happiness. And they are meat and wine. You don't like meat, you don't like wine. Well, the same way when the Beis HaMikdash stood, you didn't have an alternative. Why would it be any different nowadays that the mitzvah is fulfilled through meat and wine? Where in the Shagas Aryeh is there any indication that this is a mitzvah given over to preference? It's not given over to preference. It's the mitzvah is make yourself happy with any Torah-recognized makar of simcha. But again, we do see Darkei Tshuva, Nitei Gavriel feel that the explanation of Shagas Aryeh is now this becomes a mitzvah open to your personal preference. So right now, if somebody would want to have a milchik meal on Yom Tif, according to the Shulchan Aruch, okay. According to the Chavetz Chaim and the Bir Halacha, there's a mitzvah to eat meat, but there is this rationale that if you don't really enjoy it, and you would like to rely on the Darkei Tshuva, which by the way, the Darkei Tshuva says that he is not comfortable with this heter that he just said. He himself falls off of it, but he does bring it down. This is one level of legitimacy. Okay, now I want to tell you a very important chiddush. And this is the most open loophole to the mitzvah of eating meat on Yom Tif. And that is, it's a Gemara in Sukkah. Many people are not familiar with this. The Gemara in Sukkah says on the pasuk, look at number 22. V'tetan Rabbanon v'hayisa ach sameach. You should be only happy. It's a riboy. Okay? L'rabois leila Yom Tov ha'achron. It includes that not only do you have to be happy on Yom Tov, you need to be happy on the last night of Yom Tov. Says the Gemara, maybe it means you should be happy the first night of Yom Tov. Says the Gemara, no, ach is also a miyot. It's a riboy and a miyot. It includes the last night. It excludes the first night. Says the Gemara, why do we exclude the first night and we include the last night? Says the Gemara, the first night, there's no Simcha before the first night. We exclude the first night. The last night, there's Simcha before the last night. We include the last night. The simple reading of the Gemara is there's no mitzvah of Simcha the first night of Yom Tif. Did you know that? There's no mitzvah of Simcha the first night of Yom Tif. It's a Gemara in Shas. Why not? I'm the happiest the first night. I say Shechianu. Good for you. But God who gave you the Yom Tif said there's no mitzvah of Simcha the first night of Yom Tif. It's a Gzeres HaKosav. It's a heavenly decree. Now, does that mean there's no mitzvah of Simcha at all? Says the Shagas Aryeh in Siman Samaches. So now, if anyone asks what you learn, you could tell them you learned two Shagas Aryehs. You learn Siman Samach, and you learn Siman Samaches. Says the Shagas Aryeh, all over the Gemara in Be'ah, the Gemara says there are many leniencies that the rabbis were lenient with a person on Yom Tif because of Simcha. Do we find anywhere that you can't avail yourself of these leniencies the first night of Yom Tif because there's no mitzvah of Simcha the first night of Yom Tif? No. Says the Shagas Aryeh, that indicates there's a mitzvah of Simcha the first night, but it's only midrabanan. I'll bring you another raya, says the Shagas Aryeh. The Gemara in Pesachim says on Kuf Ches Amud Beis, if you have Dalet Koisos, you ready? You take 4 cups of wine. On your mark. Get ready. Get set. Go! And in 10 seconds, you down all 4 cups of wine. Do you get the mitzvah of Dalet Koisos? Says the Gemara. You get the mitzvah of Yayin. You don't get the mitzvah of Dalet Koisos. Says the Rashbam. Says Tosis. What does it mean you get the mitzvah of wine and you don't get the mitzvah of Dalet Koisos? Says the Rashbam. Says Tosis. You get the mitzvah of drinking wine for Simchas Yom Tif. You don't get the mitzvah of drinking 4 cups of wine for the mitzvah of Dalet Koisos. Ask the Shagas Aryeh, what do you mean the mitzvah of drinking wine for Simchas Yom Tif? It's the first night of Yom Tif. There's no mitzvah of Simcha the first night of Yom Tif. It must be, there's no mitzvah midairaisa, but there is a rabbinic mitzvah of Simcha the first night of Yom Tif. Again, the Gemara says in Sukkah on Daf Memches, the word ach comes and says, there's no mitzvah of Simcha the first night of Yom Tif, and the Shagas Aryeh says, but there is a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. So comes along the Darkei Tshuva, and he says, maybe we could legitimize the following practice. For those who feel they must have a milchik meal on Shavuos, or on any Yom Tif, for that matter, when would you recommend they have the milchik meal? At night. Why? Because during the day, you can't eat milchiks. You have a mitzvah d'oraisa of eating meat. How can you eat milchiks? You can be mavatel mitzvah, but it's not a chiyuvis. Who cares? It's a kiyumis. You ever say, well, I'm not in the mood of wearing tzitzis. See, right? Every Jew must wear tzitzis every day, but it's not chiyuvis. Yeah, but if you have an opportunity to fulfill a mitzvah, you can't shirk it. Well, that means the day of Yom Tif, you have to eat meat. But to eat meat at night, is there a mitzvah of simcha at night? It's only midrabanan. So if it's only midrabanan, for the sake of a kiyam haminhag, and it's not even a chiyuvis, it's only a mitzvah. So says the Darkei Tshuva, maybe there's a certain leniency that if you want to have a milchik meal, you could have it the night Suda. But what do you mean? I would ask, but it's still a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. Why would you forego a mitzvah d'Rabbanan for a minhag? So you could say, well, Shulchan Aruch doesn't hold of the mitzvah d'Rabbanan. Shulchan Aruch doesn't mention a word about it. So according to the Mechaber and the Beis Yosef, there is no mitzvah d'Rabbanan. Elamai, the Rambam holds it's a mitzvah d'Rabbanan, but it's only a mitzvah d'Rabbanan at night. So for the sake of a minhag, there's room to be lenient. And in fact, if you look at number 25, that's what the Stipler did. The custom of Rabbi Yaakov Yisrael Kanievsky was that on Shavuos, he ate milchik meal at night and a fleishik meal during the day. What do I say about that? I don't think it's l'chachila. First of all, even if it's not a mitzvah d'oraisa to have simcha at night, it's certainly a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. We paskin not like the Shulchan Aruch. We paskin like the Magen Avraham. That's a mitzvah. So, but it's a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. A mitzvah d'Rabbanan is more important than a minhag. No question. Yeah, but the Stipler, that's what he did. I'll say just the opposite. If you look at number 25, we have the following report, that in Shavuos, Tavshin Chavches, the stipler ate dairy that night. I have a question. What did he do the 60 years before that and the 30 years after? Obviously, he ate meat. So one time, the stipler, 1 year, I don't know why he did it that year. Maybe that year he wasn't feeling well. Did the stipler get up in shul and say that that's what you should do l'chadchila? I don't know. I wasn't there. But even this report was only one time. I don't know. Maybe meat was very expensive that year. Maybe they didn't have meat. Maybe he was allergic to that. I don't know. I know what the Mishnah Berurah says. The Mishnah Berurah says that it's a mitzvah to eat meat, and even at night, it's at least midrabanan. And even more than that, Rabbi Say, this is the opinion of the Shagas Aryeh, that at night the mitzvah of Simcha is only midrabanan. But for the Magen Avram's opinion is that the mitzvah of Simcha at night is midairaisa. Comes Reb Chaim Brisker, and we'll say it very bekitzer. Reb Chaim argues on the Shagas Aryeh. Reb Chaim says that when the Gemara says Ach is Mamayit the first night of Yom Tif, it's only Mamayit. You don't have to eat the Shalmei Simcha the first night of Yom Tif. Why not? Because you bring the Shalmei Simcha the first day of Yom Tif. You're not bringing it Erev Yom Tif. You don't have to eat Shalmei Simcha the first night of Yom Tif. But all other forms of Simcha, Basar and Yayin, are not excluded at all, says Reb Chaim Brisker. It's quoted number 26 in the Emek Bracha. He brings down that Reb Chaim argues on the Shagas Aryeh that there's a mitzvah d'oraisa of Simcha the first night of Yom Tif. And therefore, says the Darkei Tshuva, the Munkatcher, he's not satisfied with this leniency of those people who want to have a milchik meal at night. It's a very big leniency. First of all, that means you're saying, not like the Magen Avram. The Magen Avram says the mitzvah d'oraisa of Simcha the first night of Yom Tov. You're going to have to rely on the Shagas Aryeh that's only mitzvah d'Rabbanan, and you're going to have to push aside a mitzvah d'Rabbanan for the sake of a minhag. He's not satisfied. He does not render his full endorsement to that custom. So Rabbi Glatstein, let's just summarize before we get up to what are the better ways to do it. We have over here in number 28. It's a modern day sefer, Shavuos Mikdash Yisrael. Are you allowed to eat on Yom Tif a milchik meal during the day and a fleishik meal at night? What would you say based on everything we learned? Could you have a basari meal the night of Yom Tif and a milchik meal during the day? What would you say? No. You shouldn't do it. And that's what he says. Ein lasiskin, you shouldn't do it. Why? Because you have a mitzvah d'oraisa, but it's not a chiyuv. It's a mitzvah d'oraisa to eat meat. But he does bring down, he heard that Harav HaKadosh, Rav Mordechai, Minat Varna, his minhag was to have the milchik meal during the day. He says maybe he did it because Shachris took him like 9 hours. And if he's going to eat the fleishik meal in the day, he's not going to be milchik by the nighttime. So he davened a longer Shemona Esrei, like a 7-hour Shemona Esrei, right? So he had his particular reasons to eat the dairy during the day and the meat at night. But you want to know the halacha, is it correct to eat dairy during the day and meat at night? It's not correct. What about, is it okay to eat meat during the day and dairy at night? It's okay, it's mutter. It's mutter. If your custom is, he says, to wait 6 hours after eating dairy. If you wait 6 hours after eating dairy, which I have never met anyone who does, who waits 6 hours after eating dairy before eating meat, so now the only way you're ever going to be able to eat the milchik meal is if you eat it during the day. You could be mekel, you could rely on the opinion of the Shagas Aryeh that it's only a mitzvah d'Rabbanan of Simcha at night, and combined with the fact that there's a shita of the Beis Yosef who doesn't hold to the mitzvah of eating meat, combined with the minhag, it's okay to eat a dairy meal during the day. It's okay to eat a fleishik meal during the day and a dairy meal at night. But is that the best way to do it? Absolutely not. What's the best way to do it? So, Says the Darkei Tshuva, number 27, he says, since he's not pleased with those who eat dairy during the day, and it's really not really that great to have dairy at night and meat during the day, therefore, he says, Nachain lefanai yoiser haminog shekibalti me'raboisai u'me'avoisai hakadoshim nishmasa eden. My opinion is to follow the traditions of my Rabbeim and my forefathers to do the following. Lechol hamacholi cholav ba'atzeres takeoff acharat tefillah. Right after you finish davening, you make kiddush, and at your kiddush, you know what you should eat? Cheesecake, eat dairy. And after you eat dairy, you should wait before eating meat. Does anybody know how much you're obligated to wait? You're not obligated to wait. Lahalacha, you don't have to wait. All you need to do, lahalacha, is you have to rinse out your mouth by drinking something. You need to wipe out your mouth by eating something. And if you eat cheese, you need to wash your hands. And then you can eat meat. Al pi the Zohar, you should wait an hour. Most Ashkenazim understand that Zohar 30 minutes. Where that's not the Shiur's focus tonight, exactly how long you should wait between dairy and meat. But, says the Darkei Tshuva, the best way to fulfill the mitzvah of eating dairy and at the same time fulfill your biblical mitzvahs is you make kiddush and you have a little milchiks, and after you do that, you rinse out your mouth, you eat something, you wash your hands if necessary, and then you have your meat meal. And then you fulfill all the opinions, and your yotzei, the minog of eating dairy, and your mekayim, the mitzvah d'oraisa of eating meat, and ma'tov u'manon.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.